Alright, so today I'm going to go through step by step on how to change a wheel bearing. This isn't my normal type of video, but I figure since my wife's car needs a wheel bearing, I got to change it anyways. Might as well explain the process. This is a 2015 Nissan Pathfinder. Most vehicles are going to be fairly similar if it's a hub assembly. You're going to have 4 or 5 bolts in the back to take off. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your type of vehicle as long as it has the same type of wheel bearing. So first step, we're going to jack the car up. Once you got the car jacked up, I don't know if you can see that. Bring it down a little closer so you can see. That movement there is a bad wheel bearing. So, got our impact, got our lug nut key. Tire over there. This backing plate probably should be replaced. I'll have to order that and come back to it because we need this car back on the road. But it's definitely going to need that replaced. So next step, we're going to take off this caliper. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a pry bar in here behind that brake pad and pull the pad out. That way I can just take off the whole bracket instead of having to take the caliper off the bracket and then the bracket off the spindle. So we'll hopefully be able to take all of it off right at once. Alright, let me show you which bolts I'm actually working on here. So we're going with that bolt and that bolt. Now I'm trying to show you this as much as I can without power tools. Because I realize not everybody has power tools to work with. So, I already broke the bottom one free. I did the same thing. I just put the ratchet and the socket down in there and hit it with a hammer. Now, I'm going to show you a certain tool that I have to spread this caliper open. I'm not going to worry about trying to get a pry bar in there and push it open because that's not working super easy and I like things to be easy. So, get this up and then I'll show you what to do with that. Now you also don't want to let that fall and let this hose get stretched out. Alright, now, next step, now that we got that off, is going to be taking this cotter pin out. And then taking this nut off. Now this particular vehicle is a 33mm axle nut. That's where it's going to be different for different vehicles. It's the size of the bolts. And for this I am going to cheat and use power tools, sorry. luckily, I just checked this. See this moving in and out? That's the actual axle moving. A lot of times what happens is that axle gets seized in there. Luckily this time it did not. Alright. Now as you can tell, that did not come off super easy. But a few good whacks of a hammer and it comes off fine. And these 4 bolts on the back side are a 17. So how that is in there is just like this. Got 1 bolt here, 1 bolt here, 1 there, and 1 over there. Normally you'd want to use a bar for leverage rather than whacking it with a hammer, but in this case that's not really possible. You'd have a pretty hard time getting a bar in here. It would have to be so short that's really not doing you much good. Oh, that's not in there. And what else helps make this go a lot faster is electric ratchets. And I have one. I have a 1/4 inch one from Mac Tools that I could be using for these. I couldn't have used it for the 19mm bolts because I don't have a 1/4 inch socket that big. But for these ones, being 17, I could. But, like I said, I'd like to show you how long this takes and, you know, trying to get you the quick version, but want to show you it with no power tools, because not everybody has power tools to be able to use. So yeah, I can show you this a little better now. See that movement there? It's definitely not normal. Now, if the axle happens to get stuck in your wheel bearing, in your hub on those splines, you can use a puller right here to push. And it's not so much going to pull the wheel bearing out as much as it's going to push the axle in. But we don't need one of those right now. What we need is to get this out of there. Now you can see around here, that's what it was stuck on. Which, oh, there's a lot of grease coming out of that bearing. Not a huge deal, but we want to brush this out. Now there's a plastic ring in here that you can see me putting back that I took out to clean it off. Now all that is for is to make sure that the back of your bearing doesn't seize to the spindle, being metal on metal. It just acts as a bushing. So it's been a couple days. I don't know if anybody noticed it earlier in the video when I was holding this up, that is closed in the middle. This is the wrong wheel bearing. This is not for an all-wheel drive. So once I realized that, I had to order a new one. This is the new one. Now I'm going to go ahead and grease the splines a little bit before we slide it on there. And I do like to get all the screws started before I tighten them all down, just to make sure everything's lined up right. And also, I don't know about everybody, but the way I work is I do a lot of this by feel rather than trying to get my head back in there and actually see what I'm doing. Now, full disclosure here, you are supposed to use torque specs, use a torque wrench for this. Pretty much all the bolts, you should find the torque specs. Put your cotter pin back in. And now we'll put the brakes back on. Now, to get that piston and that caliper compressed so that you can get it back on without having to tap it on with a mallet, you can use a brake pad spreader, which is the tool I was talking about earlier. I just figured I would try that before I went and got that tool out. Or you could just use a simple C-clamp. That works just as well. We'll see. If I can get it on without that, I will. But if not, then I'll go grab that tool. Generally, if you're not replacing the pads, it's obviously going to be the same thickness as when you took it off. So and there you have it. Quick and simple. As long as you get the right part, that is how you change the wheel bearing.